Hello and welcome to Mandibil. This is part 10 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux's book, Essential Philosophy. And I am trying out, after some considerations, I am trying out a new piece of software for streaming. And I have to sort of get used to using this. I try the best I can to test and figure out whether or not I am doing the right thing or doing it how it's supposed to be made, and I'm hoping that at the end of this there should be something that is useful. So it may look a little different from my use on StreamYard. This is Streamlabs OBS, which is a piece of software that is sort of, I don't know, maybe it's sort of a simplified, a more user-friendly version of the OBS software, which is very complex in my. It's not like I couldn't figure out how to use it, but I would have to spend a lot of time optimizing and get to the point where, because this is a very simple kind of presentation video, right? But I got around to OBS, Streamlabs OBS, which is sort of, I guess, a more user-friendly version of OBS, and it looks like something that fits the bill for this kind of presentation. So I don't need a lot of, all sort of chat feed or all sorts of stuff, right? Just need my picture here and my presentation over there. I have to, it's the opposite direction from, mirroring, And yes, I'll just head into it and see how it goes. So I'll just adjust the microphone a bit here to make sure that it doesn't overload, and I hope that it will be recorded nicely. Okay. So let's see. Excuse me for the little pop-up sounds that arrive. There might be something important, so you will have to live with that. So it's not your computer possibly making the little ding noise. Okay, let's see. Validating the senses was the last chapter, and it's kind of, how should I put it? It's to make a sort of a more generalized statement of what has been going on so far. It seems like he is cherry picking specific aspects of philosophy and then grinding that through to some extent, right? There's this problem, with the Cartesian demon that has to be exercised. It's like it presupposes all sorts of, or at least some things that, as if it's, he presents us as if it is given that this is the next step in essential philosophy, and the untrained reader, or the one who's just entering into some kind of philosophy, is just going to say, okay, I guess that's how you do it, right? So it's not essential philosophy in that. I mean, what would even be essential philosophy? Isn't calling it essential philosophy rather than philosophy saying, I'm just going to take some, whatever I think and just call it essential philosophy, right? It's sort of, I am cherry picking philosophy. And this he could sell it, which he possibly and probably does, as, well, it's just, for the average guy or girl, right? It's like lightweight philosophy. But that might be used as an excuse for not doing it rigidly from the ground up, or, doing some rigid first principle based from scratch philosophy all the way up, right? And maybe he's just making this sort of sophist smokescreen that he doesn't really know what he's doing, right? He's sort of, making this tapestry of cherry-picked debunkings or whatever it is, right? His notions of this is important, this is important, this is important, but there's not necessarily a connection between each aspects that he brings up. And in my opinion, that is the core structure of well-presented philosophy is that it's built from the fucking ground up. If you have done that, let's say Stefan Molyneux 10 years ago made a treatise on philosophy that says, well, this is my metaphysics from this, starts from this, goes to this, and so on, establishes knowledge and goes on objectivity and truth, and I'm doing ethics now, and this is a moral principle, and this is how we apply it, and this is how I'm applying it, and this kind of all the way from start to finish, right? It's like when you're describing his approach seemed to be he's driving his car from Copenhagen to Athens, right? To get to philosophy, the Agoria, and he's saying, well, there's this point in Hamburg, right? It's very important. Hamburg is important, right? And then when you get down to Munich, you have to make sure that you don't somebody says Munich exists, some says Munich doesn't exist, but this Munich problem has to be exercised or something. The next stop on the road is some Bari in Italy, or and then you take the ferry to Albania, and then and then he says, well, I'm in Athens, right? But he doesn't start from the finish. What do I drive in, right? Where is Copenhagen? What is Copenhagen? How do we understand what Copenhagen is, and why is this direction rather than that direction? And do you have an idea of what Athens is or what Munich is? This that's philosophy, right? And then the whole route from left to right, straight out, the highway and over this bridge and so on. Hume's Isard gap, right? Which is Brindisi to Albania, something like that, right? That's Hume's Isard gap somewhere down there, to stay with the analogy. But it seems he's just cherry-picking specific spots on the road without telling anybody about Copenhagen and such, right? Just saying, yeah, that's Copenhagen. Everybody knows what Copenhagen is, so I don't need to tell you about that, right? To stay with that kind of, with a metaphor, right? So it's like, it's disjoint. There's certain aspects, unless you have a very strong idea already about what philosophy is, then you might have some, as I'm doing in this, as you possibly understand from this deconstruction, that I'm not, I wasn't born yesterday when it comes to philosophy. So I do have some idea of, potential steps you need to take on the way, and the certain steps it takes, how to approach them, right? But the disconnectedness is a sign of bad philosophy, in my opinion, right? And that's also the general problem with academia. All of these academic philosophers or related, they all have their little pet area, like, right? Then they are working with the senses, or they're working with consciousness, or the hard problem consciousness, or they're doing epistemology, or they're more philosophers, and they're into a specific kind of like virtue ethics or something like that, right? And it's like they are not even disconnected. They are they have removed everything else and then just focus on this little area. But to work as a human being, you have to encompass all of it, right? And that means you have to be concise and precise, and don't get too bogged down in certain areas that you only live once, right? You can't spend the first 30 years of your adult life trying to figure out how to act in the world. So that needs to get something on the table, right? I'm not saying it should be constructed within a month or something like that, right? But that's the huge problem, that people don't have this philosophy, and that's why they look to the state, or they look to religion, or something that already is ingrained in society at large, or whatever, right? And then they jump to that and say, okay, I'm fine now because now I have this rule I can follow. So academia is certainly not helping, right? I was listening to a couple of podcasts with a guy from England or Great Britain called one second Anil Seth, I think he was called Anil Seth, who's neuroscience philosopher, biology, something. professor in that, and she has been, grappling with consciousness for like 25 years or something like that, right? He told about some sort of mathematical project about some subset of understanding of how some little part of understanding of this, and his basic metaphysics is incorrect. He thinks that that consciousness emerges somehow from reality, right? But reality is just another label for your experiences. So it's sort of in a circular argument, have been here for 25 years. But this specific project, he had spent 10 years and some colleagues on this, making mathematical formulas about this little freaking stupid little problem, right? That brings nobody anywhere, except those who are working with it, who get, whatever taxpayer money they want to, stay alive, right? So it's this kind of stupid academia that gets the freaking bejesus out of me, right? I'm so fucking tired of academia just hiding in the ivory tower. Oh, and only now and then they pop up and write, make a TED talk, or they write a book or something, and then they, get on the bestseller list, and then they can, wow, I'm so great, right? But they're not solving anything. Show me somebody who's actually went out and said, I have found a moral principle. Why don't you try to follow this? Something like that, at least. It's always something like 12 rules for life or something like Jordan Peterson, right? All this fucking Christian bullshit. Or something along those lines, right? Nobody has done anything. Show it to me, please, right? And basically, if they do something like that, they're full of it. They are either parroting something that has already been said, like the Ten Commandments or something like that, or they've found some way to bridge Hume's is-or gap just using words, just like Stefan Molyneux does, right? They're all full of shit. They haven't figured anything out, and then they're bogged down in this little subsection of philosophy, sort of halfway science, halfway philosophy bullshit, right? Never getting anywhere. And that's exactly the point with academia. They don't want to get anywhere, right? They don't want to solve any problems, because then they lose their fucking job, right? They're trying to make sure there are problems that can't be solved. That's what the fucking state always does. All those who benefit from, all this academia and state finance, whatever, how things, who knows how these things work together, right? So, that was a long, tangential rant, but it's just my 2 cents, right? So, and I'm just some guy doing this in my spare time, right? And I'm trying to write that book that seems to be impossible for anybody else to write. It seems so incredibly. Some guy who can get bogged down, like this Anil Seth guy, can get bogged down in trying to understand how this miracle of consciousness arrives from reality for 25 years without getting anywhere, right? Except, juggling words around and writing a book and pretending like he's some sort of magician who can sort of have specific looks into that kind of understanding that nobody else can do, right? And it's fucking just in front of them, right? These people are working on trying to establish neuroscientific ways of how consciousness emerges from reality. They should be defunded immediately, right? It's bullshit, right? There's a paradox built in the foundations for what they do, right? Reality, consciousness, or what I call experience and cognition, you could say, but experience. And I might do some advanced kind of metaphysics epistemology thing in the future when I get sort of clearer on my book and so on I'm writing at the moment. I am very deep into the cognitive apparatus at the moment, right? In my book writing. The experience and your awareness of it, right? It is as if they think that experience that created this reality in them, or this reality screen that they are sort of, it's never changing, as if that is actually outside themselves and they are experiencing themselves as a subset of that reality, which is actually a part of their mind. Otherwise you couldn't have access to it, right? So they're sort of pulling the map out of the chart and putting it outside themselves and saying, look, I am experiencing reality, while it's just a mental trick that, I mean, it's how human beings have evolved. If we didn't, my supposition is that if we did not take our understanding of that reality or experience of the part of reality we have experience of as something outside ourselves, we wouldn't survive. But that doesn't mean your experience of that outside is the actual outside, right? In fact, it cannot possibly be, otherwise you wouldn't be an experience. You would be the whole universe, so to say, right? You would be that reality. So if you are the reality, what the hell am I? Just a part of your reality? Or are you a part of my reality? Or you see the sort of contradictions you end up in, right? And it's all condensed into the sort of problem called the hard problem consciousness, which is impossible to solve because it's a problem you cannot. You can propose the problem, but there's no solution to it because you do not have access to what is on the other side of your experience, right? And the problem is that when people put their reality outside and say my sensual experience arrives from that reality, that's the same as saying there must be some explanation, because that reality is what, described by the natural laws of the universe and gravity and the electromagnetic and all that shit, right? So it must arrive in my mind from that, but there's no freaking way to tell why a photon or an electron or Einstein's laws or whatever quantum mechanical laws, why that necessarily must end up as, for instance, the taste of strawberry, right? There is no freaking way. And the reason why there is no way is because there's a foundational flaw in the metaphysics in the first place. So they're looking for something they cannot possibly find because they're pretending that they're in a place they can't be. That's why they will never find any answer to this, right? And it's possibly why so many people like to study this, because there's no solution, so they can keep looking and make money and make speeches and make books and so on and juggle words around, and they will never find anything, right? If they find anything, in my opinion, you should just reject it, right? Because it cannot, even if you can't find any flaws in it, it must be flawed, because you can't find that solution from a foundation that is incorrect, right? Okay, so let's get into validating the senses, or just recapture the specific highlights I made there. Let me see it. It's been a while, so let me see if I can get up to scratch. Validating the senses. He says, our minds have no direct contact with the empirical reality external to our brains, right? Okay, so do you understand how crazy this sentence is, right? It implicitly says the empirical reality. He must have some kind of access to it in order to. It's empirical, then it's sensual, right? That's the senses. If there are no sense data or qualia referring to some sense data, however you want to put it, then there can't be there might be some reality you do not have access to, but that makes no sense to call it reality then, right? In my opinion. If it's empirical, then you must have sensual data, right? So when he says your minds have no direct contact, what does that mean? Direct contact? No, but what about indirect contact? Because that's empirical reality, right? So is he saying that the sense version of that empirical reality is all you have, because you do not have a direct mind contact with it? The mind is not it is not the thing itself. It is a mental version, and the only access you have is empiricism. Okay, I could go with that, right? But this, I'm very, very uncertain if he really understands the necessary conclusions he has to make for this, right? It is that if you do not have a direct access, you can only have an experiential access, right? Then if you're saying something is an experience of something else, right? And then you only have that experience, right? Because you do not have a direct contact. That means what you experience is not the thing itself. And yet, he implicitly says that empirical reality, right? You understand? This could both be understood as idealist and also materialist. And it points in a direction that I'm not really sure if he understands the difference. I mean, it may be a consequence of him not even realizing the problem of idealism, or the correct solution, which is idealism, right? No matter whether you like it or not, no matter whether you like those who claim to be idealists and so on, I'm going for what is right, what hangs together. And materialism does not hang together because of, particularly it ends up with the hard problem of consciousness, right? So our minds have no direct contact with the empirical realities, but it is contradictory, right? If your mind has no direct contact with it, what would you mean by direct contact, right? What would that mean? Your mind is in contact with your brain, right? And your brain must be a part of reality. You could make a little hole in your skull and put up a mirror or something like that, and then you would be able to have empirical, possibly if you didn't die from the intervention, right? You would be able to experience empirical reality external to your brain, right? Or at least you're looking from your brain from the other side. But then he says it's your brain, but your brain is not your mind, right? Your mind is within the brain. Well, that's at least the axiom I'm working from, right? So he's not careful on not conflating the words brain and mind. So it's just, I don't know. It's a big mouthful just to get in one sentence, right? It has to be. This is so foundational that it has to be very clear what he means, right? And it isn't. It isn't. Everything we perceive is at least secondhand. Okay, so he thinks that your experience is secondhand, but does he then think that he has the first hand also? Everything you perceive is, make a bigger highlight on this one, right? Everything he perceives is secondhand, at least secondhand. It may even be third hand, but it's not first hand. So, but would first hand be the thing itself, or would it be somebody else having that experience telling you, are you second hand then? What does he mean by second hand, right? It's also sort of an everyday word that needs a big explanation in order to understand what you mean by second hand. Our brain cannot squeeze itself out of the nose and land in the land of objective reality like a jellyfish feeling up a tree. No, but even if it could, it would still be experience, I would suppose, right? No matter what you do with that mind is experience. It is not the thing it's trying to experience, right? So when it all comes down, it basically is you have your experience, and at most it can be a representation of something outside that experience, possibly based on your senses. But what you experience is the qualia that is sort of deducted, you could say, from particular sense data without having access to those particular sense data, right? Even you make measurements of, waves or whatever, sound, whatever, right? It's not the thing itself. It's still an experiential version, right? This is where scientists and materialists go wrong. They take that reality they have already created and saying, this is what is outside myself, right? But how fucking could it be? It's always based on something experiential, right? So it's a derivative. It's not the thing itself. You can't make a derivative and then say, this is what I'm deriving from. A derivative can never be that which you derive anything from, right? You see how crazy materialism is, right? Everything we perceive about reality is delivered to us through the senses and the emotions, of course. And the emotions. From within the body, I would suppose, right? Everything we perceive about reality is delivered Now, this is the term I don't like, right? Delivered. No. He's basically saying that something outside is actually handing over to him kind of information of this is how it should be presented in your mind because, right? He's actually appealing to Descartes' demon. If you don't use the word demon, if it's an old term, right? Demon, right? Something malevolent. What's it called? Malevolent, maleficent. That it's delivered. It's sort of between the lines. You have to understand that how he thinks about these things is spills through into the words he uses to construct a sentence like this. Delivered, right? It's like a Freudian slip that tells you this is what he thinks. So, but he doesn't actually understand that he has to explain what deliver means, right? Deliver is when I deliver a package to you, right? There's some information. I'm handing over some information to you. This is how you should understand this, right? But there's nothing that is delivered, right? Even the sense data, you have no access to that. You have only access to whatever it is that is presented on your screen of experience, like color, like taste, like sound, and so on, right? Whatever those signals, whether you call them electricity, they are also just mental qualia representation of that specific external world that is presented on your, in your reality, right? But that's your personal reality. That reality is not outside yourself, that is inside yourself, right? That's basically the story of your life, you could say. Story of your experiences, right? Okay. This how would you know? He's talking about sense signal or qualia that is missing, or if you're looking at an airplane very, very far away, you can't hear the airplane, but you can see the airplane. And because I'm saying airplane, I must have objectified that whatever part of my experience I call airplane. Otherwise, I wouldn't call it airplane, right? I'd just say, what the fuck is that, right? And even if I say, what the fuck is that, I am actually calling it a what the fuck is that object, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't even say, what the fuck is that? Because I wouldn't have an inclination towards objectification, right? Okay, and that is possibly also one thing that is important to understand, that everything in your experience, if you start to sort of sit down and analyze it, everything, all parts of it is objectified, right? There's no part here, there's no gray areas in my experience. Everything has been objectified. And this gives you potentially a notion that everything is settled, right? But just because your mind has labeled everything as this is such a thing, and then this is another thing, and this is such an object, and so on, and most of what you are surrounded by is something that is already being objectified, and you have put it there because it is that particular kind of object, like this glass of water. It didn't just appear by itself, but because I objectified it, I'm able to, take a sip of water. Okay, but then he said, how would you know? Now that's a big problem in this, but because we are still, as far as I understand, maybe we are just kicking into knowledge, right? But it's not really clear that that's what he's doing. But how would you know? Well, knowledge is not something you're handed, right? You have to define what you mean by knowledge, because knowledge must point towards your experience somehow, right? Now, it must not necessarily be a direct reference to your qualia or your experience, which is composed of 5 types of qualia, the 5 sense-based qualia, okay? But if you're saying that you're pointing to an objectification of that qualia, then that objectification is explained by a reference to the qualia. So if knowledge could be a sort of a layer, a couple of layers above qualia, but what it points to another thing that points to another thing that eventually points to your experience, which is your qualia. So this is why I'm talking about this reduction-based being, qualia, as that is what you have to work with, right? That's all you have to work with. Whatever preconceptions you have about how to interpret this experience should be sort of put on the back burner, and then you bring them up one thing at a time and make sense of them and build your castle sort of, one step at a one brick at a time, so to say, and not some, over here there should be no bricks, and this is where it should be, and then it looks like something that is completely useless, right? It has to be something that makes intuitive, I'm not crazy about the term intuition, but it makes sense philosophically from your sort of everyday experience without having made preconceptions about how to understand that everyday experience. If it shouldn't be something that is sort of, it sounds right, but I'm not sure what the hell we're talking about, right? It should be very clear what you're talking about. Otherwise, you're just going to lose everybody. But this draws a connection between, he draws a connection between sense data and knowledge. And that's very important, I think. So he's sort of on the right track, but he doesn't actually really explain, in my opinion, that there is an important connection, right? And are there other connections, or is this the only connection, right? Okay. Naturally, a central question of epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, I wouldn't call it a study of knowledge, because you can't study knowledge. Epistemology is a philosophical attempt at reaching a definition of knowledge, in my opinion. So you can't study knowledge, because that you need to have knowledge before you can study knowledge, right? Okay, it's a figure of speech, but the information we receive from us, you don't receive information from your senses. Your senses, at most, present some qualia on your screen of experience. But how do you know that's information? What is, if I say I have experience of color green, right? What's information about that? You could say, it's information that is green instead of something else. Well, there's nothing informative about the color green as such. A lot of stuff, objectifications can have green to it, right? So there's no information in green at all, right? Just the pure qualia doesn't come with any information. There's nothing in it. Apart from the experience of green, there's no extra stuff you can derive from that as a sort of that must be what you should derive from that experience of green, right? And another way to say that is that, well, if the information arrived with the qualia, why would you need an objectification of your experience? Like, why would you need to add the term elephant, for instance, to it, right? I know there are not many green elephants, but if you say gray instead, something like that, right? Why do you need to add this elephant to it? Why don't you say that's green, there's a sort of sound, so okay, I have enough. Why do you need to put that elephant there, right? So it's like, it's just not enough to get to some kind of decision on what to do with the experience. It's not enough to say that the qualia, you have to objectify it to sort of have a connection with your emotional apparatus somehow in order to figure out what to do with it. And when you say elephant, there's sort of a clicked in ready-made solution somehow to what to do with elephant, right? Fighting, fleeing, fucking, feeding, right? A combination of these stories, right? And then you say, okay, I'm going to flee from this elephant, right? So it looks dangerous. So it's like, it might be a standard solution. There are even solutions that you are kind of born with. There are these, what's it called, phobias. I'm not particularly fond of snakes, for instance, right? Or big, insects, sort of it's spiders, very big spiders starts to get creepy to me, right? It's not something I've decided. It's not rational in that sense. It's just something that's kind of built into me. But this is kind of probably built into me from way back in history, right? Way back in evolution, right? It was a good idea if you feared these fucking critters, right? And it's sort of those who could actually have something built into them that made them shun these kinds of creatures would actually have a better chance of surviving. So there's nothing that says you should get phobias as a part of evolution. But if it is possible and it will arrive, it's kind of beneficial. So these phobias are kind of pre-programmed solutions to specific objects, or specific kinds of objects even, maybe, right? And it may be very complex. It may even be a part of the movement or the colors or the shapes and, all sorts of stuff. I'm not sure how that works, right? Okay. So the information, I have to step back a bit here. Naturally, a central question of epistemology, the study of knowledge, is whether the information we've received from our senses is valid. Well, you're presupposing that it's information, which I would reject wholeheartedly, right? You're not receiving any information. And your objectification of your experience is within you. It's not arriving. The elephant is not arriving from the outside. You are attaching the elephant from the inside, so to say, right? Now, valid is just another word for accurate or true. Whoa, just another word. So the term true is the same as valid or accurate? I mean, this is kind of, whoa, hang on, right? True is a conclusion of a proposition. When you say that's an elephant and somebody else says that's true, right? It's because they are comparing your proposition with their experience in that particular part of space, so to say. You're pointing at that thing, right? So that's true, but validity, that's a whole other story than true. True is just a conclusion, not a thing itself, so to say, right? That guy standing beside you when you point, might as well say that's false. And how the hell would you know other than you're saying, well, I'm experienced elephant, so I'm not going to take your answer seriously. Fine. But you can't tell that person whether or not they experienced that thing you're referring to, because you do not have access to their experience. Exactly because it's outside your experience, and you can't experience other people's experience, right? Which is another problem of materialism. This is called the zombie problem, right? So this is very, very, I mean, how can you even do this? Now, valid is just another word for accurate or true, right? So, and he has made countless definitions of truth, right? And now he's just equating it with accurate and valid. I mean, you can have a valid proposition or an invalid proposition. If the proposition is invalid, there's something internally wrong with the structure of the statement that makes it not being a proposition. So that would be an invalid proposition. And then he equates with true, which is only a conclusion about propositions, right? So he's fucking everything up, right? This is so lamely composed that I have to consider that he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just throwing words around that sounds like he understands what he's saying. He doesn't. He doesn't understand what he's saying. Even if he thinks he understands what he's saying, he does not understand what he's saying. You have to draw that conclusion. It brings us back to the basic question, what is truth? As discussed before, truth is a statement about objective reality that conforms with the nature and principles of the objective reality. That conforms. Truth doesn't have to conform, right? It's not a conformity. It's a comparison between your proposition. It's a conclusion about your comparison between your proposition and your experience, right? You don't have to manipulate truth to get it to conform to something else. That something else would then have to be true, right? So you're sort of stepping back into a regression and then trying to step forward to that objective, never-changing external reality. It's sort of everything is turned on its head here, right? Truth is a comparison between your experience and a proposition. It doesn't have to be you. If you're alone on an island, you don't go around making propositions because you're the only one listening to them, and it's already a part of your mental picture. But if you want to communicate with somebody else and try to agree upon reality. You have to make those propositions, and you have to get the true or false somehow conclusions about it in order to figure out whether or not you agree on it. Right? You might be wrong, right? You might be wrong about it, so you need to adjust maybe. Nobody can tell you whether you should adjust. You are the total power of your adjustment to that whatever reality you think you have a picture of, right? Nobody can tell you what is right or wrong. Nobody can give you knowledge. You have to figure this out for yourself, right? Just doing as everybody else does is not philosophy, right? Okay. And that's not a critique of Stefan Molyneux. But with the nature and principles of... So he thinks that principles and nature arrives, and then he has some external... I mean, it's freaking crazy, this materialism, right? And I can't believe that I was thinking this way like 4 or 5 years ago, right? It's so stupid, right? It's like I have this reality here which is cut out in stone and it's perfect, right? That I have access to. Otherwise I couldn't compare or, conform my truth to it. I need to have access to it in order to conform this truth, as he says, to it. But where the hell is that reality? If it's outside yourself and you don't have mental access to it, how the hell do you know what it is? So this is sort of, it steps out of existence and then into existence and becomes more important than your experience. And your experience has to bow down to this reality, which, by the way, is not a part of your experience. So where the hell is it, man, right? Oh. Okay, let's take this. This requirement for objective reality as a standard of truth can be challenging for some who believe that their own internal states have a truth or falsehood about them. Well, that's all you have. You have your internal states, if you want to use that description, right? That's all you have. You don't have access to that, whatever you call it, objective reality. What does it mean that is objective? It's not changing or something like that. So if you have access to something that is never changing, but why do you need that mental stuff, right? Why don't you just use that perfect world that you have over here, which is objective reality? Why do you need to make that sort of step down? Oh no, now I have to, I know that this objective, but I need to make this experience and then compare it to reality and say, no, my experience is bad, objectivity is good, that perfect world is perfect, and that's the principles and everything good is out there, right? So my little world inside doesn't count for much, right? It's just sort of a funny mental trick I'm doing, because this outside world, by the way, which I do not have access to, wait a second, Stefan Molyneux, how do you get to that objective reality if you do not have direct access to it? Where the hell is it, man, right? It's like, come on, it doesn't have, nothing here hangs together. Metaphysics is completely screwed, right? It's actually incredibly stupid. Okay, what we call love is merely our involuntary response to virtue, if we are virtuous. I'll leave that hanging. Objectively measured, they're sort of, this is sort of this, but why do you need to measure something if it's objective already? Don't measure it, because you're just putting something in the way and looking at a screen or something and saying, well, that's objective, right? So the objectivity machine you can put on subjective experiences or something like that, and then all of a sudden magically create objectivity, right? Do you have any idea how stupid that sounds? Okay. In other words, there are ways to objectively measure the empirical effects of subjective experiences. It's again this objectivity machine. I would like to see such a machine, right? Our bodies process deeds. Yeah, I remember that one. I was kind of confused. Our judgment should work the same way our bodies work. Our bodies process deeds, not words. I don't understand what he's saying. Its physiological effects can be objectively measured in your body. Okay, if someone pulls out your fingernails, you experience pain. Perhaps you are a masochist who enjoys the feeling, but it is pain nonetheless. Its physiological effect can be objectively measured in your body. What is that? If I'm feeling pain because somebody is ripping off my toenails, how can I measure that objectively? Right? If there's something that cannot possibly be objective, it is my feelings, right? Where do you get this? What is this objectivity machine? If I'm pulling out Stefan Molyneux' toenails, he says I can have a machine or something like that, put it on him somehow or another, and then it tells me objectively if he's feeling pain. Is that what you're saying, man? It sounds like it, right? It's crazy. Okay, then we have on the senses. Let me see if there was something there. Didn't I go through this the last time? Objectivity and honesty. I don't think we got through on the senses. I'm just going to take it from here, right? Okay. Regarding our five senses, it is certainly true that each individual sense can be misinterpreted. What do you mean misinterpreted? What are you comparing it to? You're comparing it to your internal understanding of reality, which you apparently fallaciously consider something to be outside your mind, right? So if you're experiencing elephant and you think that's a misinterpretation because my reality tells me that there shouldn't be an elephant there, so you're being misinterpreting that elephant or what? But what part of you is having that insight? Because the live experience must be the most correct one, right? So if you're having a memory of something or an understanding of this is how it should be, maybe it's that how it should be that is incorrect, right? And rather your individual sense, so to say, can be. Are you also talking about, well, your vision can tell you something else than your feeling or your hearing? But which sense is then ruling everything else? What is the sense to rule all other senses? Well, if you're saying I'm seeing this, but I'm hearing that, and I'm supposed to be hearing that, but I'm not supposed to be seeing that. What is that judgment? How do you get to that, right? Which sense is more prevalent than the other? Is that also a comparison to your internal reality, which you sort of said, but it should be this way, right? But how do you know? Because you have never experienced it before now. How do you know that the bricks haven't been turned around so that you're sort of experiencing whatever it is you're experiencing? Your mind is not trying to trick you, right? It's trying to do it the best it can, but that doesn't mean that, okay, in this case, it's tricking me. Oh, in this case, it sort of Star Wars, use your senses, Luke. Think the right way, Luke, right? Bullshit. There is a reason, each individual can be misinterpreted. Let's hang on to that one. There is a reason we evolved to have five senses rather than just one or two. Okay? So you know the reason why? Judging reality via only one sense is like looking at 20% of the night sky. No. No. You don't have to have all five senses on, just like you said with that airplane you experienced, right? You're pointing at an airplane and all you have is your vision, right? And still you say it's an airplane. You just did that, right? You can't objectify it. You can't say it's an airplane, but I don't know what it is. Well, you just said it was an airplane. So if you're saying that 20%, then that 20% isn't enough to say that's an airplane. And I would even say that it's completely wrong to say it's not correct to just say five senses, 20% each, right? That's sort of a sort of a common sense, stupid way of arguing, right? I would say that if there's no visual, there is no objectification, because all objectification needs a shape. You can't objectify anything without the shape. and you need vision to have shape. I think that vision or shapes are a very quick little derivative from delineations between colors in your experience, right? It needs to be colors. So if you say, well, that's a cloud, that's because there's very much white in that area and blue around it, let's say, right? And that's why there's nothing objective about it as such, but your mind recognizes that pattern, and that's shape. But that shape is first derived from your visual experience, and then shape is used not necessarily to, objectify anything, but if you experience that as cloud, your mind have already extracted that shape and created the objectification, and that's why you say there is, for instance, a cloud or an airplane, right? You don't need to taste the airplane or smell the airplane in order to know there's an airplane. If you say there's an airplane, that's an airplane, right? It may change into a bird later, who knows? But as long as you're experiencing airplane, that's true. That's a true proposition to you. And if you reject that, you have to say, oh no, I had to taste the airplane first. Then you can't possibly. Only the spit you have in your mouth is what you know about. The rest of the world is just something you should reject because you're not tasting everything in the world. So it's like, what are you going into here, right? Oh. When you put a pencil into a glass of water, it looks disjointed. Disjointed? Yeah, I guess it does. It's like this and then this, something like that, right? But, okay, let's take this one. However, it is important to remember that our eyes do not provide us with conclusion, merely information. But you're not experiencing your eyes. Your eyes is possibly a representation of that kind of object that eventually turns out to be colors in your experience, right? So, but when now you say they don't provide conclusions, but what is it that the senses are delivering then, right? What is the senses delivering? They're just streams of possibly something that we have no access to. We can only sort of fabulate from our previous experiences, right? Merely information. Our eyes do not inform us about the straightness of the pencil. They merely provide the light waves to our brain. Our sense of touch can tell us more. If we run our finger down the pencil past the waterline, we can feel that it is not disjointed, and we realize that the water is merely bending the light waves where the surface meets the pencil. Well, so now you're saying in this case, I'm just choosing this sense to be the right one, right? So why is it your finger that is just telling you that it's straight while it's actually bent? How do you know? You don't know. You're just conforming your experience to a preconceived idea of what you should be experiencing, right? This is very, very problematic in metaphysics and knowledge, right? You can't have any preconceived idea of what to know, right? And you may even not be able to call the shape of a pencil knowledge, right? Because many objects might have the shape of a pencil without being a pencil. Many things might have the same shape as an elephant. There's a round thing and a sticky thing and whatever, right? From a sort of, what's it called in mathematical combinatorics, graph theory, I think it's called. When you connect stuff, it doesn't have to have a certain shape as long as the connections are there in place, right? So this is highly, highly problematic, right? That you like to take a certain conclusion whenever you see a pencil in water is not a proof of knowledge of whatever it is you're trying to claim. I suppose that you are in knowledge now, right? You just talked about epistemology over here somewhere, right? So we must be in knowledge now. Our eyes do not inform us about the straightness of the pencil. They merely provide the light waves to our brain. Our sense of touch can tell us more, But if you're sort of downgrading the quality of your vision, then what is it that you use to classify whether your vision is correct or not? If you are challenging your vision in this particular case, it's only because you have another sense that contradicts it. But what makes you choose between those two contradictions? It seems like it's arbitrary. You might as well choose that the stick is bent, and it's your feeling, it's your finger telling you something that's incorrect, right? So you just say that the senses can be incorrect. Now you're choosing one of them as being the correct one. What base do you have for that? Well, you have none. It's all your preconceived ideas, what you're supposed to experience. And what are those preconceived ideas based on? Previous experiences, right? Which you also should have judged back when based on that which you should have judged, and back on infinite regression back in time, right? Okay. Similarly, we may believe that a distant image of water in the desert is not a mirage, but a real lake. Our eyes do not tell us whether a lake exists in the distance. They merely transmit light waves to our brain. If we run forward through the through the blinding heat and find no actual lake, we understand that we have been subject to an illusion. Well, if you experience X and it doesn't change, does that prove that it should be that thing? Because if it changes, you're saying, okay, now it's that which it changes, or it's non-existent because that which existed before I figured out didn't exist. So whenever you're experiencing something, you should be particularly skeptical about that experience because it might change into something else. So how long do you wait before you say, okay, I've experienced it for 10 seconds, now it must be, or 10 minutes or something, and now I know that's the case. It will not change now, right? And then it changes. So would you then reject the change then because it's been 10 minutes or something like that? You see how many problems you ask for when you make this kind of approach to knowledge. Came to the wrong about the evidence gleaned from only one sense. In this case, our eyesight. Our eyes are not. No. But there's no way of saying that when you have 3 sense datas, now it's knowledge, right? Because you just looked at that airplane up there with what you call 20% of your senses and said that's an airplane. So you shouldn't do that then, right? So what's the delineation? Where is that? Okay, now it's knowledge, now it's not knowledge. How do you know? If I'm experiencing a dog out there, should I say, well, 10 seconds, now I know it's a dog. It's not changed into a crocodile, right? Or something third. Or disappeared, right? Can I say then that I know it? Well, it might change. It may be a mirage, right? How do I know? I don't until it changes. And if it changes, does it change in something that I know must be knowledge? Just because it changes. Because then it's the change that makes knowledge. But what about all those things that doesn't change? Then I can't call them knowledge or what, right? You see how many sort of implicit questions you are creating, right? That sort of destroys your ability to make good epistemology here. Okay, let us see. However, if we walk forward and find a lake that we can swim in and drink from, then we no longer have any reason to believe that the lake is a mirage. Why? What's that matter of degree that makes you able to say, now it's knowledge, right? Well, I'm not having many mirages in my everyday, right, here in Scandinavia. So when do I know that it's knowledge? If it doesn't change, or if I can jump into it or swim around in it or something like that. You see how loose this kind of argumentation is? It's quite annoying, right? In other words, the consistent properties of a lake. Let's see. However, if we walk forward and find a lake that we can swim in and drink, we no longer have any reason to believe that a lake is a mirage, for the simple reason that all our 5 senses confirm its existence. In other words, the consistent properties of a lake. Well, I will give you that much, that the more senses you can get a hold of on a particular object, and that object stays the same, the more confident I would be in treating that object, right? Or, taking decisions or rationalize about that object. That's for sure, right? A very, very small dot up there and saying I think that's an airplane. It's not the same as an airplane out here in my garden, and I can go and taste it and, jump it or whatever I want, right? So I would agree with that, but that doesn't make it knowledge, because you consider it to be a lake before you jumped into it, right? So you have knowledge of lake before you jump into it. Otherwise, you wouldn't jump into it, because you would fear that it might be concrete instead, right? So you have already decided that it's a lake before you jump into it. So it's like you have knowledge, and then because you get some extra sense data, then you say, then I can be certain of my knowledge. But you have to have that kind of knowledge of the lake before you jump into it. Otherwise, you might consider it to be a parking lot instead, and then you will fucking crash your skull on it, right? So you had knowledge of that lake before you jumped into it. You didn't need that extra stuff, right? Or did you? And if you didn't have the knowledge of lake, why the hell would you jump into it? So you're just creating all these problems. You're not even aware that that's what you're doing. One of the reasons we have more than one sense is that it takes our senses acting in concert, reinforcing each other to establish facts about. But you don't need, if I'm sitting in a tall grass on the savannah in Africa 4 million years ago, right? And I'm hearing what I consider the sound of a saber-toothed tiger, right? I'm not even sure if they have those critters at that point, but let's just say. And I hear the sound. I'm not going to say, well, I have to have 5 senses. I have to be certain that it's a saber-toothed tiger. I'm going to get closer and look at it and taste it and feel it. No, right? You don't want that knowledge. You don't want to be more certain. It's fine that you have the sound of a purring tiger, right? You're going to step away slowly, very silently, get away from that sound as far as you can, maybe on top of a tree, and maybe have a look whether or not it is an actual tiger, right? So you don't want the knowledge. That's a very, very, very big problem in this kind of approach, because it says you have to have almost the 5 senses to be certain about knowledge, right? That's not how you work, right? You don't, if you drive the car on the road, you don't have to touch all the cars and taste all the, the passers-by in order to figure out they're there. You're just saying, well, I'm going to steer out of that one, right? I'm steering away from that one, steering away from that one, right? You don't want knowledge, actually, right? Or you don't want a more strictly clarified kind of knowledge. You just want to avoid it, right? That's a big... most of what you are actually doing with your experience is trying to avoid it, right? There's there are hundreds of objectifications in my experience at this moment, but I'm only using a couple of them, right? Those 100 objectifications are there to make me realize what I don't need, right? I don't need my curtain at the moment, or the window, or the leaves in my garden, or the picket fence, or the clouds, or the trees, or my coffee kettle, and so on, right? I don't need that object at the moment, so I have them in order to figure out that I don't need them. You understand where I'm going? Okay. We've all had the experience of walking through a room in the darkness and banging our shin on a table. We walk confidently, thinking we are avoiding obstacles, but our confidence is disproved by the sudden pain in our leg. Here, our eyes do not transmit any indication of the table, but our senses of touch and pain give us the truth. Give the truth? You're not being given truth, right? You need to understand this, right? Truth is not something you're given. You're not given anything. Your mind is creating an experience, right? That's all you have. You have an experience. How you interpret that experience is completely up to you, right? It's completely up to you. Nobody can tell you how you should interpret your experience. You might be completely different from mine, right? And I will give you that. If that's how you want to interpret your experience, fine. But I completely disagree with you, right? And I want to extend that disagreement because I find it atrocious to do it this way, right? It's so superficial. It's missing the huge chunks that you don't handle and so on, right? According to my experience, right? Okay, fine. If you have your experience and you're going with this clarification of your experience and say, this is how I see it, right? I want to create another sort of presentation of how to interpret experience based on my experience. And if I can find somebody to agree with, then we have agreement upon that experience or that interpretation of the experience. And we have to do that in order to reach a moral principle. The moral principle is reached through our understanding of our experience, right? And that's the problem with this never-changing external objective reality, because you're saying that's where it is. And if you don't believe it, there's something wrong with you, right? And you must be force-fed my understanding of this objective reality, which I, by the way, don't have access to, as you just said, right? No, you have to accept there is pure subjectivity, but subjectivities that needs to be agreed upon using objectivity, right? And those who are agreeing on a particular kind of objectivity and moral principle and so on, they can work together. And if you don't agree on this moral principle, okay, go over there. Go away, right? Or we will go away from you if that's the case, right? So if you agree, that's why there needs to be sort of as many governments as there are individuals, so to say, right? Because you have to govern your own experience. Nobody can tell you what you experience. That's a core problem in most of philosophy, is that philosophers tell everybody else how things are. And because people are trained to obey masters, they just say, okay, I guess that's what it is. If my prime minister says there's a pandemic, I must take a vaccine, right? That's how stupid it is. No, think for yourself, right? Otherwise you're being led to the slaughterhouse in the end, right? And then we have another, World War III or something like that, and whatever bullshit you can come up with, right? Okay. There are three distinct classes of sense perception. The perception of absence, that's not a perception. You can't perceive something that isn't there. If you mean by perception the qualia experience, if there's an absence, what is that? Is that a color that you're not? It's a sound that should be there, but it isn't there. How the hell do you know? And an absence, you must be referring to some objectification of it. If you're saying, okay, that's an elephant, and I look in that direction and say, I don't experience elephant, that's a false proposition, right? Is that am I perceiving the absence of an elephant? Well, I cannot possibly, because I need to have perception in order to figure out whether or not there's an elephant. But I'm using my concept of elephant and looking in that particular aspect of my experience and saying, I'm not recognizing elephant or cognizing elephant in that area. So to me, that proposition is false. But I'm not perceiving an absence, right? I am looking at that particular part of my experience as best as I can compared to your description in your proposition and your pointing. And I am, thinking of elephant while I'm trying to see if I am experiencing elephant over there. Well, I'm not, right? So it's a false proposition. But I'm not perceiving absence. An open door, but then it's a door. Huh? An open door is not absence. That's a door. That's an open door. That's a door. Oh, the perception of inconsistency. The perception of inconsistency. As in a mirage. And the perception of... Oh, no. My God, man. His understanding of cognitions and perception and senses, it's all sort of, one big pile of words, right? So it's nearly impossible to deconstruct this. It's like if somebody tells me, hey, I have built this thing in Lego, I make this Lego building, right? And would you mind coming by and make a review of it or something like? Oh yeah, fine, I'll make a review of your Lego building. And when I arrive, there's a few pieces that are put together, but it looks weird, and then a pile of something over there, and it's like, I thought you said it was a building. Oh yeah, it's a building. It's a building. It's a Lego building, but I can't get any heads or tails in this building. What? It's a building. I just made it. Right? Just throwing Lego at something doesn't make it a building, right? And that's the feeling I get with this, right? It's so ridiculously bad philosophy. It's almost so bad that I can't deconstruct it, right? That says a lot, right? Because the deconstruction has to be based on some kind of understanding of what is going on. And if I can't really understand what he's saying, I can't deconstruct it, right? In other words, things are either not there, they are perhaps there, or they are really there. When you look ahead in the desert, you see either sand, a mirage, or a lake. Sand is the absence of a lake? No. Why is sand the absence of a lake? Well, it might be the absence of an airplane, or absence of a crocodile, or absence of a, candy floss, right? Why is it the absence of a lake? You can say it's absence of almost anything. Actually, you can say it's the absence of anything else but sand, right? The mirage is the possibility of a lake. Why? What's a possibility? Okay, the mirage, because I've had some illusion of some kind, that makes it possible that it's a lake? No. An illusion doesn't raise the likelihood that there's something. It's like if you're watching a magician pulling rabbits out of a hat, that means there's a possibility that there are living rabbits inside that hat? No. While the lake is the thing itself. Okay, oh man. These perceptions, no impression, but no impression, is that a perception? Are you not talking about cognition or conceptualization, objectification? Like, lake is not something you experience. That's an interpretation of your experience, right? That's why you possibly can change it can change from being a lake to not being a lake. Because it is actually an objectification. If that's what you call a perception, okay, fine. But generally, I think that perceptions is the same as what I call experience, or maybe some impression, right? But I'm not, these kinds of words are being thrown around without any clear understanding, in my opinion, right? Inconsistent impression or consistent impression on the system, but how do you know what's on the senses? You only have the colors, the sounds, and so on. You don't know what's going on with the senses. Of course you don't, because that's also a sensual, qualia version of that reality you're referring to. It's all based on a false idea of access to an outside world, which you do not have access to. You only have a version of it, or an experience of it. You do not have that to compare to your experience. It's all experience, right? And sort of derivatives from that experience. When I look ahead on a hot road while driving, I can say the road ahead is wet and full of puddles, but as I drive closer, they all disappear and no water sprays from the side or so of my tires. And who knows, it may change back into what you just experienced. Well, why is the change into something else that which makes it knowledge? But then all those, as I said before, all those things that doesn't change, shouldn't you reject them because they might change into something that is knowledge? It's just so like, okay, now I'm going to say this because in this case it works for me, and I might preconceive the presuppositions of how to understand this, and I'm going to force feed you that. It's so bad philosophy, this, right? It's really, it's not even bad philosophy, because that would be a kind of comparison to something who actually should be able to do good philosophy, in my opinion. It's like someone who thinks he's great but has no clue what he's doing. He just thinks he's great about philosophy, right? It's amateurish, maybe it's a better word, right? It's an amateur who thinks he's a great philosopher and then just, pours Lego all over the floor and thinks he's created something, right? I'm not saying it's completely crazy, but judging from the arguments as I have done here, it points out contradictions and equations and equivocations and so on, and terms that just are brought in and pulled out, and a new version of that word is pulled in, impressions and perceptions and senses, and it's sort of absence can be a perception as well. I mean, what the fuck? Okay, let's see if. Okay, I think we'll jump to objectivity and honesty next time, and these babbling words is not really very good philosophy. So let's take it from objectivity and honesty next time, and I hope that this streaming software is actually good. I'm not sure if there's actually a limitation on the use. So let's see how it works. I think it's free, but there's also a pro version, so I'm not sure about this. Let's see where it goes. Thank you for